Again, this is the third question being put to you, Minister, on the issue of the inadequate representation for members of the Defence Forces. When my two previous colleagues raised it, the response you gave was basically to tell us of the lack of access by the Defence Forces to the industrial relations machinery. Well, that's the precise question. We don't want to know what the present arrangement is. We want to know what you've done to change it. And on your answer so far, it's kind of been to shrug your shoulders and say, sure, it's grand, the CNA scheme is there, and sure, the Department of Justice are looking at it, and I'll wait and see what they come back with. Not good enough, so you might want to add a bit in your answer now.
As I indicated in my earlier reply, I remain satisfied with the present arrangements under the combined mechanism of the CNA scheme and the parallel process in place for the Defence Forces. I have no immediate plans to make any changes. That being said, I have acknowledged to the representative associations on foot of representations made to me that I will keep the matter under further ongoing review in the light of the recent government decision to provide the Garda Representative Association with access to the state industrial relations institutions. I am advised that a working group has been set up and established by the Department of Justice to examine this matter with a view to developing the necessary draft legislative proposals. My officials will continue to liaise, and I have stated to the previous deputy that there will be a representative from the Department of Defence on that working group. And whilst we wait for the Department of Justice to progress the matter and will report back to me when the group has completed its deliberations. However, for the avoidance of any doubt, I do not want to appear to be pre-empting any future government decisions on these matters, and I am satisfied that the current structures in place are adequate and fit for their intended purpose.
Daly.
I think we can take it from the Minister's reply that ongoing review in your case means that actually you're going to do nothing. You're just going to wait and see what other people do, and you might tag along afterwards if it kind of suits your agenda. Now, the prohibition on trade union membership for the Defence Forces is effective under the Defence Amendment Act 1990. Where you are the one who can lift that prohibition, and your bystander approach is simply inadequate to the members of the Defence Forces at the moment. Now, no doubt, and you've said it repeatedly, you're happy with the CNA scheme. Nobody else is happy with that, and there is a disadvantage for members of the Defence Forces vis-à-vis any other worker in the state, including on Garda Síochána. If you take, for example, the changes which you've reluctantly agreed to in terms of lifting the exclusion of the Organisation of Working Time Act, it took 5 years for PD4 to drag ye even to the table to engage on this issue. It took the threat of legal action, including legal action for members whose activity you've correctly lauded in here, the Defence Forces who were on the Mediterranean, who in effect were being paid less than the minimum wage because of the Organisation of Working Time effect not being in place. So everything has to be dragged screaming and kicking at your whim. They want it as a right like everybody else has.
Minister.
To State Deputy, I have listened to both representative organisations, both PD4 and Turaco, and the working group that is set up, that we will have a member, and I have stated this, member of the department on that working group. And I am satisfied that we will get feedback from the working group as to how then I can proceed and review the current structures. But the CNA process, I am satisfied. I see them working on a daily basis, and I am satisfied that they are working to the extent of what they were set up for originally. And while there are very similar policies in place between both Department of Justice and Department of Defence with members of Defence Forces and members of Garda Síochána, this is not to say that one case follows the other. But once this working group starts their deliberations, well, then I will wait until the outcome of that working group and then decide on where we go from there.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Daly.
I think the denial of rights in this case is going to be dragged out of you. In the same way, I suppose, the Commissioner is going to go. It's the same thing. You're going to have to give on this one. But as you drag your heels, a lot of the damage is being done. Now, the present arrangement is not a substitute for real negotiating power. And the reason why this is important to members of the Defence Forces is that precisely the lack of that representation has resulted in their terms and conditions of employment being excessively eroded, even against the backdrop of erosion in other public services. And the answer and the proof of the pudding is in the fact that 50 and 60 personnel of all ranks are leaving every month. You can't keep people. The state's investing money in recruiting people, and the wages are so low that they can't be held. We know, for example, that in a survey recently on morale, less than half the respondents expressed satisfaction with military life, a drop over the past number of years. We know pay and conditions have fallen really far behind Defence Forces personnel at the behest of moneylenders and so on. There's an urgency in this, and sitting back and waiting for others to deal with it is not good enough.
I know the Deputy is comparing the military to Garda Síochána, and in respect of Garda Síochána, a case was brought on their behalf to the European Committee on Social Rights in relation to the restrictions on access to pay negotiations. The committee, as part of their finding, also decided that the right to strike prohibition and action was in breach of the Charter. The situation is not directly comparable to our military IR mechanisms for fundamental reasons, and one is the restriction of strike action fundamental to military service and not only safeguards any emergency requirements of the state and should same arise, but also protect the military chain of command and control. Without the same, the military could not function. But let me state that I am happy that the working group is set up. I will keep have someone from my department sitting in that working group, and then we'll review this when the working group concludes their work.
Question number 7 is from Deputy Clare Daly. Deputy Daly.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, this issue is again one I've raised, which would be for the imminent deployment of a further contingent of Irish troops to the Golan Heights. As you know, Israel has, in violation of international law, established an Israeli administration with Israeli as official administrative language. It has enforced the implementation of Israeli curricula at schools and enacted a whole slew of other measures based at permanently annexing that region. And the idea that Irish Defence Forces would be used as a pawn in that is reprehensible.
Minister.
Propose to take 7 and 16 together. Does the Deputy want to read out his question as well?
No,
okay.
No, you have the question, you're grand.
That's okay.
I'll do it next half a minute.
The United Nations Disengagement Group as Observer Force UNDOF was established on the 31st of May 1974 by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 350 1974, following the agreed disengagement of the Israeli and Syrian forces in the Golan Heights in May 1974. UNDOF was established to maintain the ceasefire between Israel and Syria, supervise the disengagement of Israeli and Syrian forces, and supervise the areas of separation and limitation as provided in the 1974 May 74 agreement on disengagement. Since 1974, the mandate of UNDOF has been renewed every 6 months, most recently in December 2016. A contingent of the Permanent Defence Forces has been deployed to the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force UNDOF on the Golan Heights since 2013. The contingent operates in the role of a quick reaction force. Irish personnel are rotated on a 6-monthly basis. The next contingent of the 55th Infantry Group will deploy to UNDOF in early 2017. I done the review in the Curragh on Friday last. I had the privilege of visiting Irish personnel based in the Middle East earlier this month. The main purpose of my visit was to meet with the members of the Permanent Defence Forces serving with UNDOF, UNIFIL and UNSO missions, and to attend St Patrick's Day events in the region as part of Ireland's overall economic, political and security engagement in the region. During my visit to the UNDOF mission, I met with the UNDOF head of mission Force Commander Major General Shankar Menon of India. He briefed me on the situation and the challenges facing the mission area, arising from the events in the area of separation. In September 2014, UNDOF relocated temporarily from a number of positions. Pending the full return of UNDOF to the area of separation, UNDOF has continued to maintain credible presence in the Golan in line with its mandate. On the 14th of November 2016, UNDOF completed its initial phase of the incremental return of the mission to Camp Fawar on the Syrian side of the area of separation, where Fijian and Nepalese troops are now based. In this context, UNDOF continues to engage with the parties on practical arrangements to allow the force to continue to maintain a ceasefire, monitor, verify and report on violations of disengagement of forces agreement and exercise its critical liaison functions with the parties in order to implement its mandate. In a recent report on UNDOF, the UN Secretary-General has stated that the continued presence of UNDOF in the area remains essential. Both Israel and the Syrian Arab Republic have stated their continued commitment to this engagement forces agreement on the presence of UNDOF. The presence of the UNDOF mission remains an important element in ensuring the continuing ceasefire between Israel and Syria.
Now, Deputy Daly and then Deputy Wallace.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Minister, with every passing day, Israel is tightening its illegal stranglehold on this piece of Syrian land, and our concern is that Irish troops are being used as pawns in yet another Israeli land-grabbing exercise. Now, you're aware, Minister, that a huge oil field was discovered in the Golan Heights in recent years. In 2013, the Israeli government gave concession to exploit this oil field to Genie Oil. They had no right, of course, to do this at all in other people's lands. But not only did they give it to that company, a company run by a retired Israeli general, a person who said famously that Palestinians were creatures who came out of the depths of darkness and they should be all killed. Israel also began at that time building fortifications which sealed off the illegally occupied Golan Heights from Syria, a 45-kilometre border increase. Not only that, but we know also of Israel giving material aid to ISIS and the al-Nusra Front in the Golan Heights. This is incredibly serious for our troops and for furthering illegal activity in the region, and we shouldn't have any part of it.
Minister, it's a situation where we're given legitimacy to an illegal occupation. The Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, recently said that the Golan Heights will remain in the hands of Israel forever. Now, Minister, the problems are increasing here. There's increased conflict and increasing illegal activities by the Israelis in the Golan Heights. Recently, in the town of Majid Shams, the Israelis started demolishing houses in the Golan Heights for the first time since Israel occupied the Syrian territory following its capture in '67. And aside from drilling for oil now, the AFEC, the subsidiary of the Genie Energy crowd that Deputy Daly mentioned, Israeli winemakers and water companies are exploiting Syrian natural resources. In October, Israel approved the construction of 1,600 new housing units in Katsran, the largest settlement in the Golan, built over Syrian villages destroyed during the illegal occupation in '67. This is looking more like Palestine every day, Minister, and the notion that our troops are being used as cover for Israelis' illegal activities isn't good enough.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Well, first of all, I don't accept that our troops are being used as pawns or cover for the situation that is going on in the Golan Heights. And let me state that I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs of what is happening, but let me state that this is a UN-mandated mission set up since 1974. I've been assured by the Chief of Staff of the Irish Defence Forces that all security measures are in place for our troops. Our troops are out there on a peacekeeping mandated mission, and as I said, I visited them only recently. They're doing a very fine job out there on the mission that they have been assigned to them by government, and like, you know, we can get into the rights and wrongs, but the participation of members of the Irish Defence Forces are, as I've stated and will restate again, is for peacekeeping duties, and that is the role assigned to them by the UN and assigned to them by
Thank you,
government.
Minister. Deputy Daly and Deputy Wallace.
The rights and wrongs that we should be getting into, Minister, before we take any stance on international relations. And you are, of course, aware that the UN General Assembly had called on Israel to desist from, and I quote, changing the physical character, demographic composition, institutional structure and legal status of the occupied Syrian Golan, and in particular to desist from the establishment of settlements, from imposing Israeli citizenship and Israeli identity cards on the Syrian citizens of the occupied Syrian Golan, and from its repressive measures against the population of the occupied Syrian Golan. And yet we have evidence that this is precisely what is being done in that region as Irish Defence Forces personnel stand by, in essence helping Israeli oil companies to illegally expropriate natural resources of another country. And as I say, it's not just wrong, it's actually dangerous, and action needs to be taken.